It's my pleasure Good evening, dear friends and colleagues from Berlin. It's my pleasure today to welcome you to this online event of the Holocaust and War project of the Holocaust Studies Program at Western Galilee College in cooperation with Yahad-In Unum. Thanks for this possibility, dear Michał and dear Albert. So on the 1st of September 1939, Nazi Germany launched the invasion of Poland, employing a new type of offensive warfare, Blitzkrieg, so named by Allied observers because of the shock and rapidity of its effects. It is debated among historians until today whether Hitler actually planned the Blitzkrieg and intended to use it as a war strategy from the outset, or what role chance played in the quick victories. Operation Barbarossa, originally in German Fall Barbarossa, was the code name for the German Wehrmacht's war of aggression against the Soviet Union during the Second World War. In the end, Germany unconditionally surrendered in May 1945. But between Blitzkrieg in German, and collapse laid another megalomaniacal goal that brought with it the deaths of millions, 6 million Jews across Europe alone, including an estimated 1.5 million Jewish children who were victims of the genocide of European Jewry. On February 18, 1943, Reich Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels proclaimed total war. Under the immediate impression of the catastrophe at Stalingrad, he appealed to the German population's will to persevere in a frenetic speech in the Berlin Sportpalast, which was aesthetically cheered by the 3,000 selected attendees. Operation Bagration, named after the Imperial Russian general of the Napoleonic Wars, was probably the most serious defeat in German military history. Within a few weeks, the German Army Group Center was crushed here. 28 divisions with around 400,000 men were lost. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our today's moderator, Albert Hytry. I hope I pronounced your show name correctly.
Yes, a lot of different pronunciations, but it's okay.
After completing a double degree in history and French language and literature at Ruhr University in Bochum, Germany in 2016, Albert obtained his master's degree in contemporary history at the University of Paris-Sorbonne in September 2018. His master thesis focused on Operation Whale, history and memory of a Nazi roundup in the suburbs of Rome. In November 2018, he commenced working as a scientific assistant at the Yahad-In Unum Research Center, where he is responsible for research and educational projects. In 2019, Albert embarked on a PhD project at the Faculty of Contemporary History of the University of Paris-Sorbonne under the supervision of Professor Johann Chapoutot.
Yes,
pronounced correctly. His thesis project is titled Colonial Imagination and the Conquest of the East under the Third Reich, Ideological and Practical Appropriation of the Living Space in German Lebensraum. And now, Albert, the floor is yours.
Verena, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction. And I'm glad to have the honor to be the moderator of today's online conference of the Holocaust Studies Program of the Western Galilee College, which is today in cooperation with Yahad-In Unum. And as you already mentioned, the conference today is entitled From Blitzkrieg to Collapse, the Eastern Front, June 1941, June 1944. For this purpose, we brought together 3 historians. First, Katarzyna Grzybowska of the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Michał Chojak of Yahad-In Unum and Dr. Yaron Pasher of the Western Galilee College. And so I'm looking forward to their interesting presentations, and I'm sure we will benefit from their insights and different perspectives of their research on the events during the Junes 1941 to 1944 at the Eastern Front. So the first lecture will be by Michał Chojak. He has worked for Yahad-In Unum since 2010. In the past 14 years, Michał has participated in 50 investigation trips in Central and Eastern Europe, during which he interviewed more than 1,000 of eyewitnesses to the Holocaust. As director of Yahad-In Unum Research Center since 2020, he has specialized in the Holocaust in Poland and in Baltic states. Michał is also involved in Yahad-In Unum's research projects in Guatemala and Iraq. He coordinates university programs developed by Yahad-In Unum in Europe and facilitates courses and seminars for students and Holocaust professionals. He is PhD candidate at University Paris I, Panthéon-Sorbonne, and his research focuses currently on the mass shootings of Jews in general government between 1939 and 1945. Today, his lecture is entitled The First Weeks of Barbarossa and the Testimonies of Witnesses Interviewed by Yahad-In Unum. So, Michał, yeah, stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Verena. Thank you very much, Albert, for the introduction. At first, on the behalf of Yahad-In Unum, I wanted to thank Verena, Yaron, and Boaz for the possibility to be partner of this important event. We had this idea, I guess, after an event that we did in January, dedicated to the genocide of Roma, and we started to discuss about the possibility of having a conference joining our forces. So we are very happy that this initial discussions finally gave us the opportunity to organize this conference. So welcome to everyone. I'm working for the organization Yahad-In Unum that some of you certainly know. This is an organization that is dedicated to documenting the evidence of the Holocaust in Central and Eastern Europe. So to sum up our activity very briefly before entering into my presentation, I will just say that after an in-depth research in archives, in Soviet, German, Polish documents and many others, our researchers moved to the field of Central and Eastern Europe, traveling from village to interview the eyewitnesses of the mass killings of Jews conducted by Nazis and collaborators. We also tried to locate the killing sites of the victim by interviewing non-Jewish neighbors, the so-called observers, bystanders, spectators, secondary participants who are present during the crime. We identified the mass graves in order to allow their protection, their preservation in the future, but also to give back dignity to the victims. We also document the fate of other categories of victims that were targeted by Nazis on these territories, Roma victims, for instance, patients of psychiatric hospitals, Soviet prisoners of war, and other groups of victims that were also killed in mass executions by different German units. And up to date, we interviewed more than 8,000 people, around more than 3,300 killing sites. So this is the map of the killing sites we located during our investigation. It's accessible online on the yahadmap.org. And what I wanted to say at first, that there's thousands of testimonies that we interviewed in the field are concerning the territories that from summer 21 were territories that were invaded by Nazi Germany and allies. It's a period of big changes in the whole geographical area. It's a period of fight. It's a period of regime changes. It's a period of withdrawal of armies, of crimes of retreating troops. It's a period of installation of a Nazi policy of extermination. It's a period of murderous activities of the Einsatzgruppen and other units that were involved in the crime. And this is a period that remains very vividly remembered by the witnesses that we interviewed on the ground, especially if we talk about territories of Baltic states, especially if we talk about territories of Western Belarus, of Western Ukraine, northeastern Poland, if we refer to current border, or Moldova. For instance, in general, the period of summer 41 is one of the period that is the more vividly remembered by the witnesses that we interviewed during our investigation. So it's very difficult to sum up in 15 or 20 minutes the thousands of testimonies that we gathered on the ground. It's very difficult to compare, to see if there are like dynamics that could repeat in between the testimonies, if there are similarities, the differences, because as you can guess, all the testimonies are the witnesses' personal experience, and their personal experience is very different one from the other, depending of their place of residence in June 41, depending on their social status and political ideas, and many other factors that make each interviewee's testimony unique. This is why, for the purpose of the today conference, I decided to choose 5 stories that I would like to quickly introduce you. At first, also to pay a tribute to the witnesses that accepted to testify, but also to show you the diversity of the topics that you could find in the collection that was gathered by Yahad-In Unum in 20 years of investigation, and also, of course, to encourage you to work with these sources. And I will finish by giving you very short information about where you can access to these sources. So I will present the stories that we recorded in 5 different areas, testimonies that we recorded in nowadays borders of Latvia, Lithuania, Western Ukraine. I will talk here about the area of Ternopil and of Lviv, but also I will underline a testimony recorded in the region of Kherson in southern Ukraine. So the first testimony that I would like to underline is a testimony of Sir Edgar, who was born in 1929, who we interviewed in the town of Aispute in western Latvia, in Kurzeme region. And I wanted to underline these testimonies because the testimony was surprising for us is the beginning of our. It was the beginning of our investigation in Latvia, and the testimonies is about the arrival of the Nazis after the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, and the perception of the local population about the arrival of the Nazis. So, for instance, in the testimony of Edgar, we can find the testimonies of a person who will speak about the regime change and the establishment of a new power in Aispute, and the part of his testimony is about the establishment of a local police. So we have many testimonies that are talking about changing, for instance, in administration, about first arrest from Germans, but also there are many testimonies that are about the creation of local police forces that will play later, obviously, also a role in the Nazi policy of extermination locally. And in his testimony, Edgar is giving very valuable information about the profiles, for instance, of the locals who joined, like the local police forces after the arrival of the Germans. He spoke about like farmers, tailors, woodcutters, giving their jobs before the occupation. He knew some of them, and it's not an isolated case of testimonies that are mentioning like the involvement of the local population into the new administration that is created by Germans, and also the police forces. Another testimonies that I would like to underline is the testimony of Marta that we interviewed like a decade ago in Gargždai in Western Lithuania, in Klaipėda region. And her testimony is very interesting because she was an eyewitness of what was the first mass shootings of Jews in occupied Lithuania that happened already on 2 days after the start of Operation Barbarossa. So Marta remembers very vividly this period. It was a period, the first day were a period of important violence, because there were some fights at the border between the Soviets and the attacking German army. There are many corpses of Soviet soldiers that were lying in the street, and with her friends she decided to go to see those corpses. And at some point she heard a shooting, and she decided to get closer to see what was happening. And finally she arrived at the moment where the members of the Einsatzkommando Tilsit were gathering the Jewish men in an anti-tank ditch in the town of Gargždai, and where they were proceeding to the execution of 200 Jews that were supposedly accused of being communist. And this is also the moment where, after the execution, in her testimony, Marta is talking about the creation of the ghetto for the local population, for the resting local population, especially the women and the children that were not executed during this execution on the 24th of June, and that will be executed 3 months later. Another testimony that I would like to to underline as another experience of these first days of the war is the testimonies that we recorded in Kulikiv. Kulikiv is a small town located in Lviv region, and so the testimony is about the establishment of a new power. I'm sorry because I noticed that it's the same captions that was during the first slide that I show you. This is not the good caption, and so the testimony is about the perception of the occupation by local population, and in this case, often in areas that were occupied by Soviets, people are not necessarily considering the arrival of Nazis as an occupation, but they will use the term that we were liberated by Nazis. So this is something that it's a marginal part in the collection of testimonies that we recorded, but it also happened in their diaries. So I wanted to underline, because of course there are many cases also where people are mostly talking about occupation when it deals with Germans, but it's not always the case. Another story, totally different. It's a story of testimony of Stanislas, recorded in 2009 in Hytry. So Stanislav was a teenager at the time of the arrival of the Nazis in the town of Hytry near Ternopil, and he is also providing a very powerful testimony about the first day of the occupation, and he is especially talking about the first day of July. In that case, not June, but July, and he's talking about a 3 days program that was organized in Hytry, and he was explaining how it was organized. That at some point the Germans started to distribute guns among the young locals, and that they encouraged them, that they ordered them to kill the Jews. So you can see on the right picture, a picture of a pound. This is one of the places where the pogroms happened. What is interesting is that during his testimonies, Stanislav also mentioned that there were cases during the pogroms that some of the locals refused to take part in the pogroms, and for that they were beaten, but that nothing like else happened to them. So it's also interesting because at some point there is like this idea of having also the choice to refuse, and the question of choice if we think about like the testimonies is very, very present in the thousands of testimonies that were recorded on the ground. And I also like to share the story of Stanisław, because on one side he's talking about pogroms and massive involvement of some young men from the town into the killings of their Jewish neighbors, but he is a person that provided shelter after these pogroms to several Jews from Hytry. He gave the names of those who he sheltered, and he showed us the place where he sheltered them in his house. They created a special access to the basement, and he was hiding like the Goldring, members of the Goldring family, Mitzenhammer, Vanetfeld, for instance. These are the names that he is remembering. And I wanted also to share the story of another person. Is the story of Mikola. So this is a story that's concerning the town of Berislav, southern Ukraine, Kherson region. We interviewed him in May 2017, and his testimony is very interesting for many reasons. Here we are not talking anymore about June or July, but more about the end of July and the month of August 41, when the Germans were advancing to the Kherson area. And this is a testimony about that is very strong about the fate of Jewish evacuees who are fleeing towards the east from territories like from the Odessa region, for instance. And he's talking, he used to live very close to the former bridge that was destroyed and bombed by Germans that made the escape of the evacuees and also of the Soviet troops very difficult. And so he mentioned that there were crowds of people waiting for the Soviet troops to build a new temporary bridge in order to be able to cross the bridge and to escape further to the east. But for many of them, unfortunately, it didn't happen, and most of the person who were waiting to cross the bridge, they couldn't at first because the priority was given to the Soviet troops, and it was at the time of heavy bombings, and most of the people that were waiting near the river, they died in bombings, and the people who did survive were gathered for 2 weeks in the building of the polyclinic. I'm talking here still about the evacuees, to be brought in a ravine that you can see on the pictures on the right, in order to be executed. So in the ravine that you can see, a ravine that was located near the slaughterhouse. So this is another example of topic that you can find in the testimonies. And basically, the testimonies that we recorded on the ground are all talking about like the beginning of the German invasion of these territories, and the testimonies are very connected with the local aspects of this regime changes. They will talk about very different topics that are concerning the historical reality of all these locations. So I would like to encourage you to access to all these sources. There are basically now 2 ways of doing it. You can do it through our interactive map. If you click on each dot, there is like the possibility to fulfill a form to get the access online to the video testimonies that we recorded during our investigations. And there is a new way. Also, I'm very proud to speak about that because it's the first time that we are announcing it publicly. We just created a new tool, which is called In Testimony. It's a video library of the testimonies that we recorded on the ground. Very basically, is kind of YouTube of the testimonies that we gathered on the ground. And so this database is accessible online. It's open source. You just need to register. And in 2023, we already put 1,200 testimonies online. And so the goal is to, in the next year, to every year be able to add 1,200 testimonies online to facilitate the access to the audience to these testimonies. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I warmly encourage you to use the interactive map and the new databases that is now available online.
Thank you very much, Michał, for the presentation. We will answer questions at the end of the 3 panels. Don't mind to put your questions already in the chat. And I will also give you the link in the chat to the both sites, to the Yahad map and to the In Testimony web page. So after the presentation of Michał, I would like to present you now to Katarzyna Grzybowska, who is a PhD candidate at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and she's a member of the Research Center for Memory Cultures. Katarzyna is a Claims Conference Saul Kagan Fellow in Advanced Shoah Studies from 2021 to 2023, a Connie Crystal Fellow since 2024, and also a USHMM Fellow since 2024. Katarzyna is conducting a research grant, Human Remains in Local Landscape Between Collective and Environmental Memory. She co-edited a book, Rysowi Świadek, in English it means Material Witnesses, which appeared in 2019 in the Jagiellonian University Press. Her research focuses on sites and non-sites of memory. Her dissertation examines the memory of Krepiecki forest, and her study aims to uncover and analyze the contemporary functioning of the Holocaust by bullet site. The main conceptual frame for this task is the theory and collective and environmental memory. She's conducted interviews, field research, and archival research. She's researching local bystanders' memory in terms of Holocaust geographies. And with her today presentation, Holocaust by Bullets in German occupied Poland during Operation Barbarossa, Krepiecki Forest as a case studies, I think we will learn a little bit more about her dissertation project. So Katarzyna, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. And firstly, I have to inform you that I'm not a historian. I tend to call myself a memory scholar. Today, I hope to give you some insights into the memory process. And about 3 months ago, I was asked by the organizers of this event to give a speech about mass killings in Krepiecki forest, to be more precise about the killing that took place in 1942. My case study area is localized in Lublin region. So part of Poland occupied by Nazi Germany and was not part of Operation Barbarossa. However, it was Holocaust by bullets killing site. That, comparing to the sites Michał Chojak was talking about, was investigated in details and had quite a chance to become site of memory, maybe even a symbol of Holocaust by bullets. It did not happen. Holocaust by bullets memory was overshadowed by the memory of the camps. It is slowly changing due to the initiatives like the one conducted by Yahad-In Unum. And it's worth mentioning that Yahad-In Unum visited and investigated Krepiecki forest more or less the same time as I started my research. This meeting will be therefore stressful, but fascinating for me. Let me come back to my case study. And I should share my screen. Sorry for that. Yep. Do you see my screen? Okay, fantastic. Situated several kilometers from Lublin and the Majdanek concentration camp, the Krepiecki forest was and still is localized in the rural area of Lublin, in a forestscape surrounded by small villages. Krepiec and Kazimierzówka. It was a place of executions, among others, of the prisoners of the Lublin ghetto, and the place where prisoners of the KL Lublin Majdanek were murdered, and people murdered in the camp were buried. The victims' corpses, both of those killed in the forest and driven to the place by lorries, were hidden in the ground or, starting with February 1943, were burned on pyres. During this procedure, some burning grounds were dug up in order to burn the bodies. And despite that, many unburned human remains are still in the forest ground, and even nowadays happen to be found by local inhabitants or researchers. As you heard, the aim of my research is to uncover and analyze the functioning of place of mass murder that contains unmarked, uncommemorated Holocaust remains. During my speech, firstly, I would like to speak shortly of how the local people were exposed to the view of the killings and of human remains, as I believe that this fact is crucial for understanding the local memory. Then I will focus on the 1942 killings of victims from the Lublin ghetto at Majdan Tatarski, and using chosen examples, signs or evidence of this killing that were found on or prepared and used in local, national, and international scale, I will discuss the memory process. To conclude, I will talk about Krepiecki forest as a non-site of memory. The number of the victims killed on 21st and 22nd of April 1942 as a result of the action in Majdan Tatarski ghetto differs in different documents. During the action, about 3,000 Jews were transported to the Majdanek. Some of them were taken to Piaski. Some, mostly healthy men, became prisoners of Majdanek, but most were taken to Krepiecki forest and shot there. Before the Second World War, Krepiecki forest was a peasant forest that was important to the local economy and used for heating houses and grazing cows. The forest paths were also the shortest road to the neighboring villages. If the forest was meant to hide the killings from the view of potential witnesses, that was not the case of local villagers. As you heard in Michał's speech, this is what happened in many sites, that the perpetrators left witnesses of their crime. During the Nazi occupation, the burying grounds localized in Krepiecki forest were covered carelessly, victims' limbs protruded from the ground. Many executions could be observed from local houses, and local forester, member of the community, was allowed to enter the forest. Going into the woods, especially to loot the murdered, sometimes ended badly, very badly, for the inhabitants of the area. Some were shot to death. So it was very dangerous. But the villagers were well aware of the crime conducted in their neighborhood. Vehicles carrying future victims or transporting corpses passed right by the locals. Children were still sent to the forest to graze cows or bring leaves for heating houses. The perpetrators committed genocide in front of the whole community of bystanders, people very well oriented in the topography of the forest. Just to show you the translated sketch from 1946 made by Polish investigators of German crimes from Lublin during their site visit when they were guided by Zajączkowska. local inhabitant whose farm you see on the sketch. Her house was localized in the forest, and she gave a very detailed testimony of what happened in the forest plots. The attitudes of the neighbors of the killing site, as well as their age during the killings and role in the memory process, differed. Some did not perceive themselves as witnesses, as in this case of a woman, back then a young girl, interviewed by Yahad-In Unum in 2017. Let me quote. Moderator, you saw some things related to the events in Krepiecki forest here. Can you tell us what you witnessed? Lady, I didn't witness it. I just heard everything from the house, those cries, those squeals, that I don't know. It was terrible. It was impossible to bear. As we learn from the later stage of the interview, this lady went to the forest and saw the mass grave, still denying being a witness. Let me now tell you about Roman Podolski, a local miller who finished just 3 years of school. In the late 60s, he became a core witness of the investigation of German crimes conducted in the forest. However, the investigation ended without conclusion. During the last part of his life, Podolski suffered from multiple sclerosis or something like that. This is the first page of a notebook testimony he wrote during his illness, as he became more and more separated from the community. He wrote several copies of this notebook and sent it to his friends. Let me quote one of many observations he wrote about, and it's exactly about the killing in April 1942. And its aftermath. Before the evening, the shots stopped down at the pits. It was raining during the night. Due to the rain, many people regained consciousness and they came out of the pits. They could not walk due to exhaustion and fear. So they sat around the pit. They were crying. The day after, I saw a middle-aged Jewish woman came out of the pit during the night. She had a wound near her eye and her face was blooded. She was walking through a field in the direction of Lublin. But I found out later that she headed in the direction of the Lublin highway, where the Germans caught her again and shot her over the same pit from which she had escaped that night. The next day, they shot those that were sitting around the pit. Podolski writes about the fear felt by the victims sitting over the pit, mass grave, a fear of escape that made them wait for the perpetrators to return. The passivity of the neighbors of the murder site, the fact that they did not try to harm the victims, may be astonishing. But so is their extraordinary knowledge. Only physical proximity allows one to hear or observe the crying of those sitting over the pit or the wounds of a woman. Hilberg writes about helping the Jews and its opposite, but giving an example of passive and active profiteering, but also says that passive neighbors constituted a human wall surrounding the Jews who found themselves trapped without regulations and ghettos. A Polish researcher, Elżbieta Janicka, also notes that fear of being observed discouraged victims from attempting to escape. We can discuss if it was also the case of Holocaust by bullets site in Krepiecki forest. The mass killings of the Krepiecki forest victims was investigated during some trials. We should mention here the process of Eric Muchsfeld, the head of the Majdanek crematorium, Udo Menenga, who was responsible for car transports of the victims and their bodies from Majdanek to the forest, and the perpetrators who conducted the April 1942 killings of the victims from Majdan Tatarski ghetto. Herman Worthoff, the field commander, Dr. Sturm, who helped him in ghetto liquidation, and at least for some time was present at the site during the shootings, and Hermann Höfle, who supervised the action. During the trial, trying to deny his longer presence at the killing site, but giving some detailed information like the fact that the victims were shot in groups of 10 or 15. Sturm also testified that he was at the site by accident, and he mentions that he suddenly heard the gunshots and went to the directions to see what happened there. So he was stopped by the SS man who was holding a machine gun. So he didn't enter the killing site. But what's also important here is that the Sturm is mentioning the belongings of the victims that he collected, many money, walking back to the road. He also mentions that those victims were probably Jews from Majdan Tatarski, because before that, Sturm took part in the liquidation of the ghetto at Majdan Tatarski. So, moreover, there are other versions explaining his presence at the killing site. So we should not trust what Sturm testifies here. But the money that belonged to the victims is an important factor, not only in his testimony, but also of the testimonies of the bystanders and of the testimonies of members of the victims group of the Jewish witnesses. This is a focus point of many narrations about the killings in Krepiecki forest, although it's also a problematic one. Let's go back to the lady investigated by Yahad-In Unum and a part of an interview I've conducted with her. Me. And as they were transporting those Jews, or victims in general, were you able to see the transports? Did you see how they drove them? Lady. Well, and they were driving the car along the road and turning into the forest. I wasn't standing there. I didn't see it. But anyway, that's what everyone saw. How they drove in a car and those people and turned into the forest and they drove them. They said that they were taking them to work. And as they turned into the forest, they already knew what's going on. They threw away what they had along the way. There may be more than once someone found something, gold and this and that. I wasn't there. Anyway, didn't go. But they already know that. They threw away what they had. Although much less about the Krepiecki forest killing is known from the perspective of the victims groups, however, a Jewish girl, Krystyna Modrzewska, previously Krystyna Mandelbaum, was hiding in the area using false Polish documents. She was working in the tax office in Bełgiew. In her memoir, she describes situations in which neighbors of Krepiecki forest were paying taxes with money found in the path leading to the killing site. She easily recognized the money as they were looted after being torn apart by the victims. Material objects were remembered, not necessarily names of the victims, that most witnesses did not and had no chance to learn in terms of Holocaust by bullets killing site. The Polish-Soviet Extraordinary Commission to investigate German crimes committed at Majdanek camp investigated the Krepiecki forest in 1944. At that time, the site of execution and disposal of the victims' corpses was treated as a part of Majdanek investigation. However, the Commission's communicates were like the information the Commission provided was separating Krepiecki forest from Majdanek, as they wanted to build a parallel between Katyn mass killing and Krepiecki forest mass killing. During the exhumation, 305 whole bodies and 68 remains of the victims of the Maidan Tatarski ghetto murdered in April 1942 were dug out. Those victims were wearing clothes, even several layers of them each. In the same pit, there were found some ghetto documents and newspaper fragments. So it was easy to recognize the origin of the victims and the fact that the victims were previously imprisoned in Maidan Tatarski ghetto. Very drastic photos and film materials were taken during the exhumation. I will not present them due to the respect of human remains and victims' memory. I'm just presenting one panorama from this exhumation, as it does not contain close-ups to the human remains. The photographs taken in the Krepiecki forest were in harmony with the poetics of the photographs of human remains taken in Majdanek. They depicted a large number of non-individualized human remains, which was to emphasize the enormous scale of the victims of the German regime. An exception to this rule was the photograph of a mother holding her child, remembered by many of the interviewed and internalized by them as their own memory. The corpses of both were exhumed and photographed in the Krepiecki forest. They were later on presented on many exhibitions about Majdanek, and they traveled Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, Soviet Union, Russia. Moreover, during the exhumation in 1944, there was a film taken. Here is the link to USHMM webpage where one can see this Soviet film. It was screened on the 62nd day of the Nuremberg trial as an evidence. It contains scenes filmed in Krepiecki forest, but the description of the archival materials that does not point towards Krepiecki forest, and it only mentions Majdanek. So it's nowadays not very easy to find materials on Krepiecki forest. And memory concerning the victims in Krepiecki forest, mainly the Jews from the Lublin ghetto. Now I'm finishing my speech. And Majdanek camp is national or worldwide forgotten. Moreover, it's overshadowed by the neighboring Majdanek Museum. However, the history of murders in Krepiecki forest is remembered by local communities, referring to uncommemorated or commemorated partially, not well enough, commemorated places of mass genocide that could possibly become a place of memory, but due to some reasons they did not. I use the term non-site of memory. The term was used in one of the interviews given by Claude Lanzmann and conceptualized by Roma Sendyka. As you see, the basic indicator of such sites is lack of information, altogether or proper founded information, of material forms of commemoration and of representation. What's important is the presence of human remains at such sites, and although they do not share physical characteristics, they share one specific feature. The victims who should be commemorized in such sites typically have a collective identity, distinct from the society currently living in the area, whose self-conception is treated by the fact that the non-site of memory is in their neighborhood. In many cases discussed here, it's the very last moment to collect knowledge from the last direct witnesses of the crime. In the future, what is left will be only material witnesses, forensic investigations to be conducted, as those sites often still contain human bones, even in the forest floor. On this photo, some from 2022, students of Caroline Strudy course found some human remains on the forest floor, and they are marked with red flags. Most pieces of the bones were very small, but one was undoubtedly to be recognized as a human remain. So I strongly believe that those sites have to be investigated like the way that Yahad-In Unum does, that's for sure, but also in terms of its physical features and the site itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarzyna, giving us insight to your research about the Krepiecki forest and especially about the non-sites of memory. From there, we will now switch to Dr. Yaron Pasher, who is a member of faculty at Western Galilee College. He teaches history in the Holocaust Studies Program as well as in the departments of interdisciplinary studies and logistics. He is also currently, from 2022 to 2024, a lecturer at Appalachian State University in North Carolina at the Center of Judaic, Holocaust, and Peace Studies in the History Department. Pasher's fields of expertise is the comparative history of the Second World War and the Holocaust, also integrating modern Jewish history, strategic thought, and wartime logistics in the 19th and 20th centuries. I think he will give us now some insights of his expertise fields with his lecture entitled The Destruction of Army Group Center and the Final Transports. Yaron, stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Abra and Michał, our partners at Yahad-In Unum, Verena, Boaz, Katarzyna. Welcome, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon. The new offensive the Russians launched at the end of June 1944, exactly 3 years after Operation Barbarossa, took place during the second phase of the Hungarian Jewish deportations, parallel to the advancing stages of the Allied armies after the landings in the West. Throughout the fateful days of June 1944, the Western Allies focused naturally on the fighting in Normandy and on the hope that the war could be brought to a rapid conclusion. However, little attention was paid to the momentous events that were taking place simultaneously on the Eastern Front. While the German army deployed 59 divisions in the West, 165 divisions were still engaged in combat in the Soviet Union. The existence of other fronts.
Yaron, we see only the first screen of the PowerPoint.
Yeah, okay. It's fine. The existence of the other fronts at which Germany had to keep substantial forces or deliberately run great risks was a key factor in rendering the invasion in the West feasible. A few German divisions were in Italy and in the Balkans, but in mid-1944, about half of all German divisions were on the Eastern Front. Any landing in the spring of summer of 1944 in the West was conditional on the amount of military pressure the Soviets put on the Wehrmacht. The summer Soviet offensive was expected to keep the Germans from moving any large units from the Eastern Front to the West once the Allied forces smelled victory. The main problem was that Hitler was simply not prepared to deliberately make a major sacrifice of territory in the east in order to send massive reinforcements to the western sector, where a successful defense was needed, since the Atlantic Wall had proven useless in that respect. Nevertheless, matters on the Eastern Front were not quite at a standstill. On June 22nd, 1944, one of the largest campaigns on the eastern of the entire war was about to begin in Byelorussia. 118 Soviet infantry divisions and another 43 armored divisions began a combined offensive on the Wehrmacht's Army Group Center. Planned for early summer, Operation Bagration, the Soviet campaign launched to drive the German army out of Byelorussia, was delayed by endless disputes over supplies and logistics. The only reason Bagration escaped the kind of epic treatment that Stalingrad and Kursk campaigns were given in the history books was because it was overshadowed, especially in Western Europe and the English-speaking world, by the drama that took place on the beaches of northern France. Named after General Pyotr Bagration, who died defending Russia on the battlefield of Borodino in 1812, the operation fulfilled Stalin's promise to Churchill and Roosevelt at Tehran to launch. Can you see the PowerPoint now? Did it change? Okay. To launch an offensive in support of the opening of Western Front in France. The Red Army had managed to liberate some 330,000 square meters, but the German formations were still hard to break. In July 1944, German industry reached a peak in war production. Steel production was 3 times higher than that in the Soviet Union, and in the second half of 1944, Germany produced over 17,000 planes and over 19,000 heavy tanks. 9,000, sorry. The German Wehrmacht had a total of 324 divisions. 179 of them faced the Red Army in the summer of 1944. An additional 49 divisions belonged to the Axis powers, brought to the total of 4 million men on the Eastern Front, with 49,000 artillery guns, over 5,000 tanks, and almost 3,000 planes. The Red Army possessed 6.4 million men, with 92,000 artillery guns, over 7,000 tanks, and over 13,000 airplanes. Nevertheless, the Soviets, like the Germans, suffered from severe manpower shortages. By 1944, the Red Army faced a manpower crisis that was in its own way as serious as that confronting the Wehrmacht. Many rifle divisions had an effective strength of 2,000 men or less. The resulting disparity between the official and actual sizes of many Soviet units goes far to explain the seemingly amazing performance of some German counterattacks. The ability of a full-strength Waffen-SS division to halt a Soviet corps or army probably resulted more from the numeral weakness of the Soviet units than from the strength of the German attackers. Operation Bagration entailed 5 separate coordinated strikes along the Soviet Western Front, with Minsk's strategic prize liberated on July 3rd. Within 3 weeks, the troops of General Konstantin Rokossovsky's First Belarusian Front had crossed the border into Poland. In just 12 days, German Army Center lost 25 divisions and more than 300,000 men. In the following week, and lost more than 100,000 men. The Soviet drive finally slowed towards the end of the month, as its armored spreadhead had become worn down and dulled. The cost of the Red Army ran to tens of thousands of lives. To claim that this was a huge Soviet military success would be an exaggeration. Stalin's regime waged war in a very special manner, which eventually was the key to Soviet victory. Human life counted for little in the scale of history compared to the interest of the state. General Zhukov explained the strategy to Eisenhower simply, quote, "When we come to a minefield, our infantry attacks exactly as if it were not there. The losses we get from personal mines we consider equal to those who would have gotten from machine guns and artillery had the Germans chosen to defend that particular area with strong troop forces instead of with minefields. Some Soviet divisions, including those that fought near Mogilev, were so battered that they were forced to withdraw and regroup in late July. After 5 days of the offensive, the 12th Panzer Division was still on its way, since with just over 11,000 personnel, it was not yet a full division in summer 1944. It needed only 53 trains to move it to its new position. Having passed trainloads and administrative troops and civilians with their baggage, all traveling westwards, the division's first train arrived in the Marina Golka area at the rear of the 9th Army, some 30 miles southeast of Minsk. While attempting to hold open an escape route for the 4th Army, it was halted by a railway official with the news that the line ahead has been demolished in order to prevent its use by the Soviets, and that since the unloading ramp was about to be blown, they needed to unload quickly. Hitler seemed encouraged since the front was now shortened. On July 7th, he ordered the formation of 50 new Panzer Grenadier divisions and 10 Panzer brigades composed of men from decimated divisions. The new forces absorbed all the replacement instead for the Eastern Front, and for July-August 1944, and 45,000 troops released from hospitals. Despite German needs to direct new divisions and equipment eastwards throughout June and July, the Wehrmacht was still able to contain the Allied bridgehead in Normandy. It is impossible that the measures in Hungary against the Jews were congruent with the immediate needs of the army when even 45,000 troops newly released from hospitals were used to form the new German divisions. On June 28th, more trains carrying troops of the 12th Panzer Division arrived throughout the day and were unloaded in Marina Golka. In other words, the entire process of moving the 12th Panzer Division from the north sector to the Belarusian sector in order to relieve the 9th Army lasted 8 days. Hitler reluctantly released the 12th Panzer Division from Army Group North to stem the advance of the right wing of Rokossovsky Belarusian front, which was already threatening to cut off the entire 9th Army east of Bobiusk, a situation that was sufficiently critical to break Army Group Center. One division could have changed the fate of an entire army group. Once the Red Army troops began storming towards the German forces, on June 22nd, 1944, they left commanders of the Wehrmacht in no doubt that within a few weeks, they would create a situation that will lead to a fundamental change in circumstances on the ground. More than the invasion of Normandy then, the beginning of Operation Bagration had a strong impact that would bring the Nazi high command to the events of the July plot in 1944. On the height of June, 1944, Belarusian partisans launched a wave of attacks against railroad junctions, bridges, and other key traffic points of Army Group Center's rear. Although local German defenses repulsed many of the attacks, more than 1,000 traffic junctions were put out of action, rendering a German retreat, resupplying, and lateral troops movement impossible. The planners of the Hungarian deportations were no doubt aware of these difficulties, but did nothing to delay them in order to release extra trains for supplies. Until June 22nd, when Operation Bagration was launched, the SS used 115 Reichsbahn trains to deport Jews from Hungary. Up to June 16th, over 340,000 Jews were deported from Carpatho-Rutenia, North Transylvania, and North Hungary to Auschwitz. The next phase of deportations would begin on June 25th and end on July 8th, when Army Group Center collapsed. The 115 trains that carried them could each have fitted 750 German troops and at least one Panzer division. As in the Western sector, they could have been used for military purposes rather than deporting innocent civilians. Theoretically, if the Wehrmacht had used these trains for transferring the extra divisions needed in Belarusia on the eve of Operation Bagration, over 86,000 troops could have been transported, comprising 21 infantry divisions, which are a full German army, in fact. This was half the strength needed to reinforce the entire front, according to Marshal Zhukov. Such a major shift in the balance of power could have changed the scenario between the Wehrmacht and the Red Army in June 1944. Judging by past experience, when the Russians reached Minsk, Army Group Center assumed that they had attained their first major objective, and having gone 125 miles more than their usual limit on a single issue of supplies, would pause for a few days, at least in order to regroup and resupply. They were wrong, however. The Soviets continued their offensive, forcing the 9th Army to retreat towards Bialystok and the eastern Prussian border. The Soviets, who by July 13th had covered more than 200,000 miles without a pause, had for time outrun their supplies. They were now deep in territory destroyed by recent fighting, where bridges had to be rebuilt and rails relaid after the Germans turned long stretches of the railway lines into tangles of twisted tracks and broken links. Even at this stage of the war, the Red Army forces, opposing Army Group Center, were still too weak to achieve overall superiority. When the Stavka first began to plan the battle, it discovered there were 42 German divisions totaling 850,000 men, facing approximately 1 million men in 77 divisions and 5 mobile corps on the Baltic and Belarusian fronts. In late June 1944, the deportations from the Hungarian provinces were virtually completed. The attention of the de-Jewification squads turned next to the Jews of Budapest, the largest Jewish community still relatively intact in the Nazi-dominated Europe. Behind the scenes, doubts about the deportations were reaching a head. Finally, on June 6, 1944, the very day the Allies invaded Western Europe, the Reich Audit Office issued a new set of regulations. This was no coincidence, since by then, no more trains were to be used solely for military requirements. The new instructions were forwarded to the Secretariat of the General Government. The bottom line was that from then on, the Ostbahn, which was considered a fundamental asset of the general government, was no longer to have external rights on the Eastern Railways. Any train operation would have to get permission from the transport minister and the Reichsfinal Finance Court. This meant that men like Rudolf Gierke, Wehrmacht Chief of Transportation, Franz Nowak, Eichmann Assistant, and Eichmann himself were no longer free to obtain and coordinate trains without questions being asked. However, the routes via Malkinia towards Treblinka, Auschwitz, Belzec, and Lublin, examined by the audit office, did not seem to make any sense on the strategic level. Regulations concerning the railway system of the general government and economic and financial auditing were issued even on June 6th. The decree dealt with the operation and management of the Eastern Railways, while Reich Minister of Transport Dolpmüller was expected to see that the interests of the Reich and its overall traffic be taken into consideration when dealing with permits to rail traffic around the general government. It included financial statements and a balance sheet showing profit and loss. Examinations under the continuing accounting regulations for the German State Railway were conducted from July 11, 1939, almost 2 months before the war began, taking into consideration the special position of the Eastern Railway, the German Reich railway system, the Ministry of Transport, and the auditors of the Reich. The financial statements of the Ostbahn were also scrutinized under the same regulations. Their balance sheet were to be available for the Transport and Finance Ministries within 6 months from the end of the year. Interestingly, these regulations were written on May 15, 1944, the day the first transports of Hungarian Jewry departed to Auschwitz. However, it was no coincidence. Only the timing was bad, and it was already too late. By July 8th, the Reichsbahn had used 147 trains for this mission. The deportation from Hungary to Auschwitz continued throughout the first week of July, as did deportations from Holland and France. Despite the pressure of the Allied forces in Normandy, and even the Dall'Annecy camp in France was still being used to deport Jews from Paris to the east. Deportations began whenever the number of inmates reached 1,000 to 1,500. On June 30th, a train carrying 1,153 Jews left Paris from Auschwitz, traveling through eastern France, the Rhineland, Saxony, and Silesia, without interference. At the time, the Allied armies were battling in Normandy, less than 150 miles away. It is almost certain that the Germans were not really interested in liberating the Jews of Hungary in large numbers, as the Eichmann-Kastner negotiation suggested. The speed and scope of the unprecedented deportation and extermination to Auschwitz leave no doubt as to their true intentions at the time. The contacts with the Jewish representative was simply a ploy to deceive them and leave all options open. German considerations were guided by the notion that if the Allies rejected the German offer, it would be easy to blame them for assisting the mass extermination of Hungarian Jewry, similar to after the 1938 Evian Conference, when all Germans claimed that nobody wants them, referring to the Jews. On the other hand, if by chance, according to German thinking, the Allies began negotiating with the Germans and it came to Stalin's knowledge the Great Alliance might collapse, and even that, an event that Hitler was eager to see happening. Recollecting and organizing events in his favor, Eichmann would later claim that the 10,000 trucks exchanged for 1 million Hungarian Jews were for the use of the 18th and 22nd SS Cavalry Divisions. The mess surrounding the Allied bombing in Germany and France carried no real weight then in changing the tide of the war in the West before the end of 1944. Although at the beginning the bombings were a substitute for opening a second front in Europe, they had no real impact on the progress of the war, except perhaps psychological ones. The last mass transports of deportees that could actually interfere with military needs took place in August 1944, when some 67,000 Jews from the Lodz ghetto were dispatched daily to Auschwitz. The last transport, which left Lodz on 30th August 1944, was on its way when the Red Army was already on the banks of the Wisla River in Poland, only 100 kilometers from Lodz. By the beginning of September, the Germans estimated that the Allies had 53 divisions in the West. Theoretically, the same number could be counted on the German side, but their combat strength seldom amounted to much more than a third of an Allied division, the equivalent of some 27 German divisions facing 53 Allied ones. Since the successful Ardennes offensive was imminent in mid-December, allocating fresh divisions would indeed have been feasible. Thus, instead of the Lodz transports, the Reichsbahn again could have transferred at least another division, if not 2 or 3, depending on combat strength, either to the western sector or to the east. What seemed to be certain victory in the West after the breakthrough from Normandy and the collapse of the German army in France during August 1944 turned into an improvised retreat, albeit a very efficient one, to the borders of Germany and the Netherlands. As a result, Germany's Western Front stabilized during summer-autumn 1944-45. The Germans were sufficiently rehabilitated in early winter that fighting was almost static, until the Wehrmacht received enough reinforcements to renew combat on all fronts. Some assaults cost the Allies dearly because of the difficult terrain, mud, and rain, as well as the skillful German enemy. Surprisingly, when preparing the offensive in the Ardennes, the Wehrmacht used 64 trains carrying ammunition for what would be their last successful offensive. This gives an idea as to how much effort and rail resources the Nazis used, for instance, when they transported 67,000 Jews from Lodz ghetto to Auschwitz using some 52 trains. One can only imagine how much ammunition and determination would result from a similar mission in late August against Paton's stationary ranks. In conclusion, the Soviet offensive known as Operation Bagration began on June 22, 1941, on the anniversary of the German Operation Barbarossa, and lasted for over 2 months. It ended with the destruction of the Army Group Center and resulted in the heaviest German losses since the beginning of the war. It unbalanced the whole front so much that, as an indirect result, the Wehrmacht also lost its Army Group North, hemmed in and reduced and paralyzed in the Baltic states, and its Army Group South Ukraine destroyed in Romania. The Red Army advanced an extraordinary 600 kilometers to the west, as far as the borders of East Prussia and the edge of Warsaw, Hungary, and Yugoslavia. The political impact of these military successes was remarkable. Finland, Romania, and Bulgaria changed sides, and the later two started the process of Sovietization, while the subjection of Poland grew faster. It is impossible to understand Bagration without being aware of 3 crucial factors. 1, the Red Army was now vastly superior to the Wehrmacht in both manpower and equipped, including in the air. It no longer logged as far behind in matter of command and control, and with the American trucks that had been supplied, it had the mobility that its opponent now lacked. The second one is the superiority enabled it to launch a series of 6 offensives from Finland to the Black Sea, creating a system that was both military and political. Bagration was just one of these, although it was just the most spectacular of them all. The third one was that the Germans were also unable to move forces from west to east, as they had in the previous years, since Stalin was now in possession of vital information. the Western countries were going to land in France in May or June 1944. He had heard this from Roosevelt at the Tehran Conference in November 1943. The previous president had asked him to launch a simultaneous offensive. This became the first real East-West cooperative operation. Encouraged, the Soviet strategists began to consider penetrating 2 or 3 times as deep as they had ventured so far. Stalin also agreed to this bold move because in the wake of the Anglo-American landings, he feared that Hitler was hoping for a change of alliance. It was in the spirit that he viewed one of the consequences of Operation Bagration, the plot to assassinate Hitler on July 20, 1944. In contrast to previous campaigns during the Ardennes offensive, which began on December 16, 1944, and which initially went well for the Germans, there were no transfer to the death camps. The only camp that still functioned during this period was Auschwitz. However, in December 1944, no transports arrived there. Apart from a small number of Jews sent there in January 1945, just before the Russians liberated it, there were no mass murder activities. This raises questions concerning the burden the final solution placed on the German resources and its impact on the tactical capabilities of the Wehrmacht. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yaron. So we come to an end. We heard like our 3 specialists about the events from June 1941 to June 1944. And we got also some questions. As time is running, I try maybe to resume them quite quickly and also give one maybe to Michał, one to Katarzyna, and we will see if there's maybe a question also for Yaron. So one question for Michał could be interesting. The topic of sexual violence before and during the massacres of the Jewish population in the occupied eastern territories of Soviet Union. Are the witness and testimonies of Yahad-In Unum are speaking about this subject, Michał?
Thank you for the questions. Yes, obviously we have recorded testimonies that are mentioning cases of sexual violences. For instance, I remember cases of witnesses talking about sexual violences in ghettos prior to the shooting, but also cases of sexual violences on the execution site. So I would, if you would be interested in having access to this material, I would recommend you to write us an email or through the interactive map. To fulfill a form, and we could give you the access to a sample of testimonies about that. There are a few researchers also that did research about the topic, like for instance Marta Havryshko in the recent years, and some publication of her about the topic are very, very interesting. But it's hard to answer in general because it's not like a systematical part of the testimonies that of the witnesses that are mentioning the cases of sexual violence, but there are some, and it's not 1 or 2. It is more. I guess we have several dozens of testimonies that are talking about sexual violence.
Thank you, Michał. Maybe for Katarzyna, you are expert about the mass shooting at the Krepiecki forest. I think one question would like to know if there are similar cases of mass shootings and mass graves. Maybe I would say especially like non-sites of memory, because there are a lot of shootings, but maybe cases like the Krepiecki forest that are non-memory sites.
Like, I did not elaborate on this further, but in fact, in Krepiecki forest there is a monument, but it does not mark all the mass graves. So not all the mass graves are mentioned, are marked, and moreover, the data given on the memorial is not correct, like in terms of numbers of the victims. But like, telling the truth, I think that the best person to answer this question would be Michał, because you conducted very broad research on Holocaust by bullets in Poland. I would say that in terms of non-sites of memory, if you are interested in this exactly, there's a book by Roma Sendyka and others on non-sites of memory, and not only about Holocaust by bullets killing sites, but other mass killings sites that are uncommemorated and are containing human remains. So those are also Roma sites. Those are also some Polish sites, and I highly recommend this book, though it's in Polish. That's a drawback, but I think it has some summary in English as well. Indeed, there are many subsites. I will not give you the number. Michał, it would be better to answer that. But like, it's even impossible to give a number, because it's hard to tell if, for example, some sites in the area of concentration camps would be, you could call those sites of memory as even concentration camps contains mass graves that are not commemorated or not marked, like, I cannot answer this question, but still, if you are interested in non-sites of memory, there were some actions, even in Poland, that were detailedly trying to answer this question even in 60s, when the scouts were conducting an alert to find killing sites and sites of struggle and in their neighborhood. So then they collected thousands of maps of killing sites in their neighborhood. So yeah, that could be my answer. And men are still under investigated.
Okay. Thank you, Katarzyna. I think we came to an end already, quite late. So many presentations and information. Yeah, at this point, I would like to thank Verena, Yaron, Katarzyna, Michał, Boaz, for this cooperation of the Western Galilee College and Yahad-In Unum. And maybe you have some final words at the end of this panel. Thank you, Verena.
Yes, thank you, Albert, to being our moderator today. And to our audience, I want to send many regards and apologies, because Boaz had to leave already. And yes, and I wish to thank you, Albert and Michał, for the nice cooperation, Yaron and Pasher for your lectures. And I hope you will be with us on the 17th of July next time, exactly in 4 weeks, because we have an online event about Leon Polyakov, and the flyer will be out soon. Thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. Bye.
Bye.